Okay, I'm going to start our English and language arts lesson reading our story, Poppy. We left off on Friday creating a flag that Poppy could have carried as she headed towards Mr. Okax. We learned that surrender means that you're like giving up or you're okay with losing. And a white flag was often used. So many of you created awesome flags that Poppy could have carried as they headed toward Mr. Okax to ask permission for them to move into the new house across the field. So the chapter I'm going to read today is chapter 6, Standing Before Mr. Okax. As I read today, think about some rules that you believe Mr. Okax would like the mice to follow. You're going to make a list of rules later that you think Mr. Okax would like the mice to follow. Remember, he's the boss. Chapter 6. The leaves of the oak tree around Mr. Okax's oak shielded him from the rain, but Poppy and her father were being drenched. The owl's head, moreover, was pulled down between his wings, while his eyes, enormously wide and unblinking, gave Poppy the sensation that there was nothing she might do or even think of doing which he would not see. To Poppy, he seemed to be pure power and fury. Wanting to look away, she glanced at the base of Mr. Okax's tree. There lay what appeared to be a mound of pebbles. Gradually, a realization came over her. What she was seeing was a mound of Mr. Okax's upchucked pellets, the closely packed and undigested bits of fur and bone from his dinners. The vision made her blood turn cold. Only the sound of Mr. Okax's sneering voice jolted her back to alertness. "What do you want, Lungwort?" the owl demanded, his claws continually flexing on his perch. Lungwort, holding cap in hand like an empty bucket, said, "May I wish you a very pleasant evening, Mr. Okax?" "It's not very pleasant," Mr. Okax returned with a snarl. "No? Well, you're absolutely right there, Mr. Okax," Lungwort replied, straining to sound nice. "But April showers, as the song goes, brings May flowers, and Mr. Okax clapped his beak. "Lungwort, it's summer. Did you come here to sing me songs, or do you have something important to say?" "Well, in fact, I did bring—" "Hurry up. I've not eaten my dinner yet, and I'm hungry." "Well, yes, of course," Lungwort said. "I understand perfectly." Lungwort hastily put on his hat, not noticing until too late that it had filled with rain. Water cascaded over his head. With a nervous shake, he fumbled to unroll his speech paper. Before he could get it out, Mr. Okax's eyes grew bigger. "Who's that?" he demanded as he moved his head around to bring Poppy into better focus. "Forgive me," Lungwort said. "I've been rude. This is one of my dutiful daughters. Poppy, step forward. Look up. There's a good mouse. Mr. Okax, may I introduce Poppy to you?" Prodded by her father, she stepped forward carefully. All she could see was Mr. Okax's eyes. She felt not just looked at, but attacked. "Poppy, hey?" he growled. "I think we've already met." "One of my sweetest daughters," Lungwort offered. Mr. Okax ignored him. Instead, he said, "What happened to your nose, girl?" I scraped it." "A close call, I'd say." "Yes, sir." Little girl mice should be more careful. Yes, sir. Do you understand me? Poppy wanted to run away. Lungwort nudged her. Poppy dear, Mr. Oacax asked if you were understanding him. Yes, sir, I do, Poppy squeaked with a bob of her head. All right then, Mr. Oacax said. Now be a little girl and come stand under my tree while I talk to your father. Hating herself for acting so fearful, queasy at the thought of going closer to the mound of pellets, Poppy appealed to her father with a look. Lungwort, however, nodded, like, get going, girl. Move it, Mr. Oacax snapped. Averting her eyes from the pellets, Poppy crept toward the tree, the flag dragging behind her. But when she reached the spot, she was unable to resist the fascination of the horrible mound. Once she looked, she caught sight of something that glittered. All right, Lungwort, Mr. Oacax said, let's hear what you have to say. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Lungwort held out his piece of paper. Now, the thimbleful of water, as well as the rain, had drenched it. All the same, he tried to read it. Mr. Oacax, great horned owl, ruler of Dimwood Forest region, who, out of his kindness and wisdom, protects all members of the deer mice family. Whereas the said family of deer mice living in Gray House, in return for Mr. Oacax's protection, have agreed to ask permission whenever they wish to move about. Whereas the deer mice family, having grown so great in numbers, need a second place to live so as to maintain and enhance their lives with enough food. And Lungwort paused to shake the paper. The paper was getting wet, Lungwort apologized. So is the style, Mr. Oacax observed. Go on. Lungwort cleared his throat and continued to read. Whereas Mr. Oacax, protector of deer mice, is famous for his kindness, generosity, and compassion. Therefore, stop. Yes? Repeat that. What? The line about me. So Mr. Oacax likes hearing about himself. About kindness, generosity, and compassion? Right. I like that. That's well written. Yes, thank you. I wrote it. Whereas Mr. Oacax, protector of deer mice, is famous for his kindness, generosity, and compassion. Therefore, said deer mice of said Gray House, humbly petition, said Mr. Oacax, to, will you get to the point? Mr. Oacax screeched. I'm sorry, Lungwort said. The rain has washed away the rest of my writing. Then just dump it and say what you want, the owl boomed. We humbly request your permission, Lungwort said, to move. Move? Yes. Why? I said we are too many. We need more food. Where do you want to go? The new house. First, Mr. Oacax blinked. Next, he swiveled his head around, frowning first at Lungwort, then down at Poppy, then again at Lungwort. Finally, he said, you mean that new place up along Tar Road, beyond New Field? Poppy thought she heard something new in Mr. Oacax's voice. She tried to grasp it. Yes, sir, Mr. Oacax hesitated. Well, have you been there? Now Poppy was sure. It was uncertainty that she was hearing. Have you been there? Mr. Oacax demanded. Well, the truth is, Lungwort said, my friend Mr. Yes or no? The owl screamed. Well, no, not exactly. But my friend told me it would make an excellent source of food for half of my family and Longwort, Mr. Oacox interrupted. I forbid you to move to the new house, which means you are not allowed to move there. What? Longwort gasped, flapping the rain away from his face with his paw. The word had all but stuck in his throat. Permission denied, Lungwort. You cannot move to new house. But why, sir? Because I said so. But the gray house area does not provide enough food. It's urgent that some of us move so we can survive. No new house. Now I've got dinner to catch, so you better skedaddle. Unless, of course, you want to please me by leaving your daughter. Then, ha ha ha, the owl chuckled, I might reconsider. But, Mr. Oacox leaned forward. Ooh, ooh, he wailed in his loudest but lowest voice. The sound exploded over them. Poppy, clapping paws to ears, ran around from the tree toward her father, who was still standing there stammering. But, come on, Papa, Poppy urged, trying to turn her father around. We better go. With difficulty, she turned him. Lungwort, Mr. Oacox called suddenly. Lungwort whirled so fast the thimble fell off his head. Bowing, smiling, he began, You were just teasing, weren't? Listen to me, Lungwort, Mr. Oacox cried. I've two more things to say to you. First, pass the word among your friends that I've spotted a new porcupine around Dimwood. Porcupine, Lungwort echoed dumbly. A particularly vicious one. But don't worry, I'll protect you. Second, it's about your daughter there. If you want a reason for my refusal, ask her how she and I met before. Reason? She didn't ask permission to go to the hill. That's why you can't go to Newhouse. Yes, but beat it, Lungwort, now. Come on, Papa, we better leave. Lungwort glanced about for his thimble hat. It had rolled away. It was Poppy who retrieved it and put it on his head. Resigned, a sagging Lungwort allowed himself to be led away. Poppy glanced at her father. All traces of dignity were gone. The wetness that ran down his face was not rain, but tears. Poppy hardly tried to keep the flag aloft. And as they trudged home, she kept stealing looks into one of her paws. In it clenched something she had pried from one of Mr. Oacox's pellets. Ragweed's earring. Okay, so very intense chapter 6 now that Mr. Oacox has talked to Mr. Longwort, and unfortunately, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to move to Newhouse, to have some more room, and to have some more food there. So now I'd like you to take out your red notebook. You got your red notebook. And it should be the very next page after all of the things we've been writing about Poppy. And I'd like you to think of 3 rules that you know or think Mr. Oacox the owl wants the mice to follow. Okay, I want you to try to think of 3 things that Mr. Oacox wants the mice to follow. For example, we already know 1 rule, so that could be your first rule. He does not want the mice to move in the field without asking his permission. So that's one rule that we already know Mr. Okax has for these mice. So you can use that as your first rule, and then I want you to think of 2 other rules that you think or know that Mr. Okax is using for these deer mice. Okay, it sounds like it is pretty intense when they have to talk to each other. So try to think of 3 rules that Mr. Okax the owl has for these little deer mice. And I'll see you back for chapter 7.